in 2D animation. And I think it's a great opportunity to learn something new, or if you've always been thinking about trying something with effects animation, this is a great start to try something and maybe get out of your comfort zone. So let's, yeah. Hi,
Okay,
welcome. I'm
I'll
very
take it
happy to
away.
have you. Yeah, take it over. I'll be happy
So
to join you along.
today will be animating electricity, and this is a foundational 3D fixed animation workshop. So we won't be doing anything fancy or too difficult because the goal of this is to kind of ease you into the animation and into the effects, since it's a pretty complex and pretty different field compared to character animation. So electricity is probably the simplest of all the effects, and it is very forgiving. So you can't really make that many mistakes. You can make it slightly less interesting, but for the most part, it will still work. So that's why we'll be dealing with electricity and specifically charges. So the plan for our workshop is something like this. So we start with some basics and theory on the electricity and animating charges or effects in general. Then we'll do some very, very simple animations. And then I'll explain some principles that apply for more difficult charges. And then you can always ask questions that I will answer at the end of the stream. And yeah, that's pretty much it.
Yeah, I would only add, if you have a question, please put like a word question in caps in case we might miss it in the chat. But we'll do it all in the end, and I'll keep track of the questions so I won't lose any of them, and
Thank
we'll get to
you.
answer all of them. Yeah, so let's start with the workshop. Can't wait.
Okay, let's go. So this is some of the more fancy charges and electricity that we can do. So let's show something a bit less fancy. So this is something less fancy in terms of drawing quality, but it's still a bit more tricky in terms of animating. So let's uh, let's talk a bit about electricity. So what is electricity? So electricity is like a light emitting highly uh, very bright energy that is created from extreme like charges in the air or not in the air. And for our purposes, what's important is that these charges, they actually move really fast. And by really fast, I mean thousands of times per second. So when you see a lightning bolt in the sky during the thunderstorm, what you're actually seeing is one of 1,000 charges. So that's why sometimes you see that there's something light up, but you don't see the charge because it happens so fast that you only see the aftermath without seeing the charge itself. And that's why the charges look a bit chaotic, especially when you're like looking at charges like this. That's because it's not one charge. That's 1,000 different charges that we see from different points of time in different points of time. So that's why the form changes quite a lot. But at the same time, if nothing in the conditions changes, the form actually doesn't change much. And we can show that with this lightning example. So you can see that the basic form of this charge, since the scale is so huge and it happens so fast, it doesn't move much. And that's one of the main concepts of electricity. So it is, let's write it down very quickly. So it is fast versus slow. So the charges happen fast, but the changes in charges can happen slowly. So you can have a very fast change in shape or in motion, and then you can have a really slow, really gradual changes. And this helps us build contrast. So this gives us contrast, and it will give us contrast in terms of form. It will give us contrast in terms of speed, and it will help keep us keep animation interesting. Second, flickering. because charges happen so fast, we don't see every charge, and the charges appear and disappear within like fractions of a second. So what it means is that we can skip frames. So the charges can disappear and appear seemingly out of nowhere, and it will still work if we continue the motion. As long as we continue the motion, as long as we make it readable, it will work, and flickering will actually make it feel more electrical because electricity flickers in reality. So that's the second thing. So the third thing is chaotic changes or chaotic form. So electricity is generally pretty chaotic, which is represented by these things. This is way more stylized. This is a bit of a different story. So fast versus slow, flickering, being chaotic. And the fourth principle is probably one of the most important principles, and it doesn't even apply just to electricity, it applies to effects in general and characters to some degree. It's wave principle, which is kind of an artificial concept, but it helps us animate scenes. What does it mean? So usually scenes are transferred in a certain pattern. And you've seen waves on the ground during earthquakes, maybe. You've definitely seen waves on the ocean or on the sea. And these waves, they travel in some direction. So electricity, especially with charges, we see these traveling waves, and energy travels. And it is especially clear with more simplified examples, which we'll show a bit later. And it helps us convey the sense of directionality. So even if it is pretty chaotic, we still have the general direction of motion. So keeping all this in mind, we'll start doing a simple animation, and we'll start with doing the wave principle and then making it from a simple wave to an electric wave. So if everything is all right, I'll keep this, and let's do a simple wave animation here. So let's cover the bottom part. With sphere. And let's do a really simple animation. For example, you can also follow along, and that would be probably the best thing, since that's the best way to learn. So we'll have start and the end. So this is our plus and our minus, our starting point and the ending point for the electricity. So now, first we need to define some kind of form. It doesn't have to be completely round. It doesn't have to be precise. We just need a form. Now, there are two ways of animating. So we can either flip between frames, or we can use light table. So light table is great when we have something very precise and when we have small spacing. When the changes happen quite fast, we don't really need it. We can just flip between frames and see how the energy goes. So here we are tracking these kind of big areas, big points. So this scene, we're moving it to the right. So let's draw the scene appearing, this scene increasing in size and going to the left. This thing goes to the right. Sorry, to the right, yeah, to the right. This thing decreases in size, it kind of goes to this point, closer. Now, let's add one more frame. So now we start creating this upper part. This thing goes up. And this part that we already had goes to the bottom, increase inside of it, in size. This part goes here. And for electricity, we don't really have to worry about precise shape and form. It can change. So we have something like this. Okay. Now let's continue. So the wave keeps going. The scene increases in size, goes to the right, goes to the right. The scene starts to decrease in size. And for example, we have something like this. Okay. The scene, we create a new wave at the bottom. We keep moving this wave to the right. Keep moving this wave to the right. And we keep moving this one to the right. Okay, so now we have to think about looping it. So to loop animation, our first frame should match with our last frame in terms of spacing. So the distance that it travels between frames and the shape that it arrives should match. So for example, we have the shape here and the shape here. So the previous frame, if we imagine it, would be a frame where this part is somewhere over here. So it is more to the left. This part is more to the left. This part is more to the left. And this part is more to the left. So let's copy that and let's paste it here. And let's see, okay, so how many frames do we need to have something like that? Okay, I think we can use this shape and this shape should become this shape. So in order for that to happen, we can roughly calculate the distance. How? So with each frame, our form travels around this amount of space, this distance. We can let it accelerate a bit in the middle. So we need at least 2 more frames. So let's do 2 more frames here. So let's do frame 1. This shape increases, this shape goes forward. This shape goes forward to the right. And let's do 1 more frame. And for this one, let's see. Okay, so we have this light table. And now we can see how to transition between these 2 frames so that the forms arrive where they need to. Okay. And now we'll color this in the right color. Okay, so now we have this. Let's disable this part. Okay, now we have this. It's a wave. It's not really electricity yet, and it's a bit too fast. So let's put it on 2s, on 12 frames per second for now. So now let's make an electricity out of it. So how do we make it more electrical? So coming back to our nodes, going back to our nodes, we can add flickering. So if we want to add flickering, what does it mean? So the simplest way, and not the best way, but still working, we can delete every second drawing if we held the frames on 2s. So we show 1 drawing and 1 empty cell, 1 drawing, 1 empty cell. And this creates flickering, which will already give us some kind of definition of electricity. It looks kind of broken up in space, and we have some kind of on and off, on and off, on and off. So this already gives us something. Now I'll save this and duplicate the layer just in case. Now let's add the second scene. which was the first thing. So fast versus slow. So now everything is fast and nothing is slow. So let's add in some places, instead of an empty frame, we'll add a slower motion or a slower change between the frames. So for example, here, we'll add a frame instead of an empty one, where it moves, but just a bit. And here, we'll add a frame which, let's add a frame here, which is a bit closer to the first frame than to the second frame. Okay. So now we're not skipping every frame. Instead, we have a frame, slower frame. We have a frame, empty frame. We have a frame, slower frame, frame, empty frame. Let's keep this empty. Keep this as is, keep this as is. And let's add a frame here, which is closer to the second frame, the green one. So what does it give us? It will give us uneven motion. Okay, so now the motion is a bit uneven. And now let's truly make it chaotic. So electricity is rarely this perfectly round or anything like that. So let's keep this base shape, but let's add some stuff on top. So what kind of shapes do we imagine when we think about electricity? It's something like chaotic, rough, maybe pointy shapes. So something like this. Maybe we can add some fun transitions like that. Maybe we can break it up a bit and add some thick parts where the form goes much bolder, much more visibly. We can make some shapes that are very broken up. And here. And then we'll add an extra step. So we're not worrying about precisions, we're just having fun for now. And it will not look perfect, and that's totally fine. Okay. Okay. Okay, now we have something more chaotic. We have some flickering, and we have the wave transition. Now, can we make it even more electrical? And the answer is yes. So we only added some chaos and some changes to the drawings, but we haven't changed the motion really. And if we look at our examples, especially this one, so what is the difference here? So the form changes. It's not a constant wave. There are some wave transitions, and then there are transitions that are more straight. There are some parts that are more like triangles. There are some parts which change the shape quite a bit. So we can start at this. And for example, I just want to make this a bit straighter at this part. So this part, it goes and the wave goes forward, but some parts of the wave become much more straight. And I still worry about keeping the energy going. So it still goes, it just goes in a slightly different shape. And then it can come and becomes this big wave. And now to make it more interesting, we'll make this part more flat and less even. And here we can let it become more even here. And here, let's make something wild. So maybe it pushes here, becomes bigger, and goes kind of rotating around this point. So it rotates, and it comes back here. And we go here. Now this is something more like electricity. So now we can add some missing flickering back here and there. So we have 2 frames here, 1 missing, 1 frame here, 1 missing, and so on. So we have an uneven tempo. So 2 missing, 1, 1, 1, 2, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 2, 1. So, and this is the rough way to get something looking pretty electrical, not very stylized, but still having that kind of electric motion. So how can we push it even more if we want to? So we can still see this kind of wave motion a bit too clearly. So why does this happen? We kept some of these frames with the wave rolling. So let's keep this base motion, but let's break up the way it goes. So it goes like this, and maybe here, instead of drawing a proper wave, we'll do a straight line with a tiny end to show the wave. And here, there is nothing, there is just noise. And here, we can keep it. And here, again, instead of a proper wave, we'll keep it more straight. Keep it like this. And here, we can make it really dramatic. And then it settles down. And maybe inverts a bit. Well, now it is a bit more like electricity. So that's kind of the gist of it. So what's the most important thing here? So first off, we need some base motion. So if there is no base motion in our electricity animation, it won't be very clear what's happening. And it doesn't have to be a wave, but it has to be some kind of very basic, very readable motion. So let's look at the example here. So the motion is looking complex, but why does it work? So we have a transition. So this part, it's moving to the right. So we go 1, 2, 3, then we have fast change, and it's still moving to the right. So there are fast changes, there are changes and rotations and all that stuff, but we preserve the base motion, even though we change the spacing and it's a bit more chaotic. So here, the same principle. We still move the masses and we still have that transition. And because it is there, it will read even if the form changes are quite chaotic. So this is the first one. Second one is be free. Don't be caught up too much on the drawing. Focus on the motion, focus on the way it feels. Because electricity, again, is a pretty flexible effect. It can do anything. There are no real limitations. And since we don't see it very much in real life, there is no real expectations for it. And yeah, don't be afraid to be chaotic. So now this is kind of a very simplified way of animating electricity. And that's not how I would normally animate it because it takes a lot of steps. to do it like that. And you don't have that much control over the final input. So the simplest way to animate it would be just to start with a couple points and just drawing a line. And again, keeping in mind the transition and all that stuff, and just keeping the energy going. So for example, we start with a line like this. And then we're like, okay, so maybe I want this line to become a more broken up line, as it kind of resembles a wave and goes to the right, but maybe a bit slower at the start. And then it kind of accelerates, goes faster to the right. So right now we're moving pretty slowly. Then we're moving faster. Then this part is going, becoming bigger. And it is pretty chaotic and it's still moving to the right. And then I wanted to reach this point and be relatively fast for a frame, this frame. And then I wanted to slow down and we kind of move a bit less. We have some contrast in terms of speed. So we move slower. And now we'll start changing the form a bit. Maybe more. So it kind of shrinks. And then the form changes here in the middle. And then we have this wave and it's going up again. And this part is over here. And now we push this wave to the right. And we can add a secondary wave. So we can add smaller charges here and there to make it look more interesting and complex than a single line. So kind of adding smaller, thinner lines to complement our animation. And now we have something way more chaotic. And now we need to tone it down just a bit over here. So we need to create a more clear transition. So here we go. And this part is very fast. So we have the change here and then the change here. So here we move straight up and here we move straight to the right. And this is the kind of things that we want to avoid because we're going in a straight line to a straight line. So we're doing a corner. And when we're doing a corner, it means that the force is flipped. And usually forces change on a curve or maybe on a triangle, but rarely in a straight line because it means that there is an instant change. So to kind of ease it into this change, you can add a frame and start moving it to the right more, up to the right. Then we can move it even more up to the right. And then we'll reach this point. Then here we can keep the transition and add one more frame to settle things down because at the start we almost have just a straight line. Okay, so we have something like this. which is a bit more chaotic and interesting. Now again, we can add some uneven blank frames, sometimes set it between each frame, sometimes between two frames, just to make it interesting and uneven. So set something like this. And now we have more interesting, less wave-like electricity animation. So this is still pretty chaotic. And I think we can keep it more interesting if we add something at the bottom or on the left. Why is that? So if you look at this animation, everything intense, everything chaotic happens only on the second part, on the right half of the electricity. So if that's the case, we have kind of an unbalanced effect, which sometimes can be useful, but since we don't have any context or any outside forces, it feels a bit strange that one part of electricity is very stable and doesn't change much, and the other half of the same charge is changing quite a lot and is being really dramatic. So we have two options here. We either make the left side more dramatic, or we make the right side less dramatic. So let's do kind of half and half. We'll make this transition slightly less dramatic, and we'll make the changes on the right slightly more dramatic at some points. So this kind of point, we can make it more dramatic. So it is more dramatic here. Then we can make it a bit more dramatic at the bottom, where we get this charge. So now we have something a tiny bit more balanced. And so are there any issues still? Well, we can kind of play with it a bit more. And the thing that we can push here is, if you notice over here from this frame to this frame, everything moves up. And this is kind of a tricky thing with most effects. It is the same for smoke, it is the same for fire. If suddenly everything in effects moves in a singular direction, unless there is a strong force like wind or something like that, it will feel strange. So the same for electricity. So to keep it more interesting, we can keep some forms going the same way they were going, so going down a bit, and keep some forms going up as we previously animated. And this will make the effect feel less forced and more flexible and natural. So we're keeping the transition. Okay, this feels a bit more natural in a sense. And the only thing that feels weird at this point is that it becomes a straight line all of a sudden. But we'll keep it like that for a bit. So this is kind of the base approach that you can employ. Now, this is the fun part. You can try any shapes of electricity, you can try anything and try animating this kind of waves, experimenting with how you can break it up and how you can make it interesting. So if you have any questions, you can ask them now if anything is unclear. And I think we can talk a bit more about the specifics of electricity now and animate something more proper.
Yes, please do. We had a question, but I think it's more general and we could skip it. We can talk about it more in the end. It's just about your animation journey. So
okay. So if that's the case, I'll give myself a minute and we'll start doing something a bit more proper.
Okay. This looks like magic. It's straight up. When you started like animating them and like when you hit play, almost like you put it like through your fingers, you know? It was so quick.
It was so
I'm
quick
just
because
crazy
I
impressed.
didn't have to be precise, and it's not a good lighting animation. Yeah, that's
Easy.
the other point. It takes time, and to
Mhm,
actually do something more proper, which we'll do in a minute, yeah, you need to be a bit more specific and a bit more patient.
mhm.
Okay.
Yeah, okay. And some people are saying that this looks very fun, and I completely agree. Effects
Yeah,
animation.
yeah, yeah.
It
This
feels
part,
completely different from 2D like character animation. It feels a bit
yeah.
much more like liberating, just like foot stuff and looks good. But it probably takes a lot of effort and a lot of uh like visual like eye knowing like where to put the accents in.
Oh, yeah, for sure. I mean,
Yeah.
out of all the effects, electricity and abstract magic kind of
Mhm.
stuff is probably the
Mhm.
most flexible because you don't really have to worry about much. But
Mhm.
other effects are, depending on the type of effects and the speed, can be way more rigid in nature.
Mhm. Do you find that what's your favorite type of effect? I'm just asking because I'm personally interested.
It's
Would you
hard
like
to
animate
tell.
most?
Uh, well, the issue is that, I mean, animating the most and being the favorite effects is not actually the same thing, I would say. So
Yeah.
I would, I like smoke effects or explosion effects
Mhm.
and water, but they're pretty tedious to animate, especially at big scale. So electricity is probably the most fun to animate
Mhm.
because there is little precise tracking and there is little of electricity at a scale that would take you like days to finish. Usually, these shots don't take much time, whereas
Mhm.
with other effects, especially the slowest effects, which are like huge smokes and huge water, they can easily take like weeks to months to animate a single shot.
Yeah, I bet. Oof. So you wanted to show something more complex?
Yeah. Now we'll
Mhm.
go to less fun part. So the
It's
less
so
fun
fun.
part. So if you look here, the thing is that the spacing sometimes gets pretty small, and that what makes it interesting and way more grounded is that, for example, here, let's look here, let's look here. Some parts move very little, they change shape very little, and then we have a big contrasting change. Then it moves smaller, and then it moves smaller in some parts and bigger in other parts. And then we have a contrasting change. Then we have a small change, really small change, still a small change, and then we have a contrasting change. So for this kind of stuff, for more realistic and more proper kind of electricity, we need to actually track stuff. So what I mean by that, so every mass, every part of electricity has a direction it follows. And it has kind of the laws that it follows. So in this case, what are the laws? So this part is being pushed to the bottom. So it moves slightly to the left and to the bottom. And this motion is pretty nuanced and slow at the start. So if we take this, for example, we have uh, one, two, very small change, still quite a small change, but a bit better, a bit bigger. So we have acceleration, then it moves faster here, and it creates this kind of curve. And then it kind of rotates in space. So if you imagine it, it's doing this kind of stuff. And then it goes up. This part has a law that says it goes up on the curve. So, and it roughly follows it. Really slow at the start, way faster here, slow there. This part has a law that says it goes to the bottom on a curve. And we also have this fast, slow kind of change. How do we decide these forces? Well, part of it is just design, and part of it can be described as like opposing forces. So if this force pushes here, then we have this force that is kind of opposing it and doing the opposite and pushes it down. Then this force pushes it down, and this force pushes it a bit up here. And this creates contrast in terms of design and eventually shape language. So let's take this concept and try to apply it to our small charges. So we'll have a charge here. We'll pick our brush. We'll give it some width variation, and we'll start with the first frame. So now we want to make it a small, slow change. And we want to add an initial element of transferring or moving the width across this line. So this kind of implies energy being transferred. So our charge can become bigger and can become thinner or thicker. So in this case, we're making it a way thicker, and we're transferring this energy from left to right. And we can start adding the width here. And I'm tracking these points. They're moving to the right. And this part, let's decide this part will be going to the left and down a tiny bit. So this will be a slower motion. So we're still transferring the width from left to right. And this is a slow part. So let's add one more slow frame. And now the width is being transferred to the right. So this part becomes thinner. And the right part becomes thicker. Now, we had a slow part. Now let's add a dramatic change. Let's add a dramatic change. So right here, we can skip a frame. And let's add something opposing. So this curve was pointing up. We'll add something pointing down. So this will be something pointing down. Okay. And then we'll add a slow motion again. And now let's imagine the scene as kind of a piece of metal or a bent piece of paper. Maybe I can visualize it with my headphones cord. So this part is this kind of curve pointing down. And then we are rotating it towards us. So it goes like this. So we'll do this kind of motion. So it starts going here, and then it goes, this goes forward, but we're bringing it towards us, which means that it will move slightly up and it will change the shape. So this part goes down, this part goes up. And we'll add some chaotic motion to it. So the form changes a bit when it does that. Oops, we're not tracking it properly. And let's not forget about the value and energy transfer. So let's make this part thicker here. Then this part becomes thicker. And then this part becomes thick, the same. we can make our brush a bit smaller. And let's add a frame with a really small change.
The thickness of the electricity is dependent on how much charge it holds.
Kinda. I mean, we're not really animating realistic electricity, so it doesn't mean much for us. Realistically, yeah. It depends on the voltage and the amount of amperes, like the power and all that stuff. But for our purposes, it doesn't really mean much.
Just for flavor.
Yeah, just for design purposes, for interesting purposes. And it also helps us create something. So this is slightly more interesting. And we can add skipped frames, and we can add frames instead of skipping frames. We can make frames that are very thin. So we kind of see the remnants of electricity while it disappears. So instead of doing this, we can add a frame that is pretty close to the previous one. It still moves a bit, and it's pretty thin. Maybe it's a bit thicker in some points, but it's pretty thin in the other points. Okay, we can add a frame like this after this one, for example. So it kind of starts to flicker, starts to disappear a bit, and then we see the fast change. And let's see what we got here. Okay, now let's do the same here. And to make it more interesting, we can make some frames thinner here already to make it more contrasting. And add a very thin frame here that is quite close to this one. And it can be closer to one frame in one side and the other frame in the other side. So for example, here it's closer to the red frame in this part, but closer to green frame in this part. This will make us, help us rather create more interesting design because we're not just repeating the same shape. It still moves. And we can do something here. And we can add some skipped frames, some blank frames here and there. Example here. And let's add a frame here and a frame here. And a frame here before the start. Maybe a frame here. This is something working kind of okay. I think we've added a bit too many empty frames. It starts flickering a bit too much. And that's when you know when your eyes are hurting that you've done a bit too much skipping. Okay, so now let's push it a tiny bit and make some of these thin frames have some thicker elements. So this element can still be pretty visible while the rest of the frame is thinner. And this will give us more variety in this frame. This frame can be thicker here, thinner here. This frame can have some bigger parts. And okay, so let's add another change. So let's take a brush. So we were going here, then we went down. Let's go up one more time. I'll remove this actually, and let's add another frame somewhere over here. And we'll just animate it straight away. So it becomes thicker. Then we slowly move the charge from left to right. This part moves slower. This part starts going a bit faster. We're moving the charge, the weights to the right. And let's add some really slow changes here and there. So this changes a bit slowly. Slowly changing and going to the right. And let's see what we've got. Well, this is a bit less than stellar. What? Let's vary the direction a bit. Vary the direction a bit. Okay, see, we were going to the right, then we suddenly go to the left. So we can change this a bit. Can change this a bit. Let this go down. Let this go here. Let this go down. Let this go here. Let this move properly. And here we can cheat a bit and add a second part. And then let's skip a couple of frames. So this is a tiny bit more controlled. Maybe a bit too flickering still. And this is built more on like a couple specific poses with changes between them. And if we don't want it to be obvious where it loops, we need to break up the start a bit, because if you have something really dramatic and then it becomes a straight line, no matter how you try, it will be very obvious where it loops because you'll see the straight line. So if you want to loop it without that, obviously it's better to avoid it becoming a simple straight line. So we can keep it something more chaotic. Yeah, you see, immediately after I did these first couple of frames, we don't have that obvious start because it doesn't have this very obvious, very clear straight line. And now it loops a bit more clearly because we don't have that, and because we made our electricity in a way that we change between directions, and we always have kind of 1 and 2. So we're going down. So let's start. We're going up. Now we're going down. Now we're going up. Now we're going down. And now we're going up. And this will also help us loop because we have interchange in directions. And the direction at the end of the frame continues the direction at the start of the frames. And that's an example of more complex, more controlled electric animation, more of a contained, more controlled chart. And that's the main thing. So these two both are valid for different purposes and for different kinds of animations. Of course, this didn't take as long and is definitely not as polished or as good. But in terms of types of electricity, they're both fine. And we can look at these examples that I did for students before. So these are just some examples of different types of electricity that you can animate. So the first type is more akin or more similar to the last that we animated. It has a really strong change and really slow motion within each part. So we have this first major pose, major change. And we have this interesting shape. And this kind of electricity depends a lot on the shapes that you use and on the fact that every shape is pretty interesting and strong. So it has different sizes, it has variation in directions and in placement. So here, this part moves slowly, this part moves fast, this part moves slowly, this part moves faster. So we get nice contrast of speed. So we go 1, let's look 1, 2, 3. So this is a really slow motion, and this is a pretty fast motion. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. And this goes 1, 2, 3. And this goes 1, 2, 3. So each has a specific direction it follows. And then we have a change. So again, we invert it. We have a scene like this, then we have a scene like that. And again, we have a fast part, which follows this curve. We have a slower curve here. We have a slower curve here, a really slow part here, and a faster part here. So again, everything has its own path and its own direction. And again, we have opposing forces. So this force pushes down, this up, down, and this down and up. So we have a variety of energy forces going on here. Then we have fast change. Again, we're changing the direction and inverting the shape. And again, we have a fast part. This part is fast. And then we have slow parts. 1, 2, slower. And this is even slower. And this part even slower. And then we have again a fast change. And this part moves slowly. And this part moves really fast. So this kind of electricity depends a lot on this kind of changes and strong poses. Then we have this thing. And what is that even? Well, this is a wave that we're animating, but it has less obvious change because there are multiple waves in the same animation. So we have this wave and it goes, and we have a next wave and it goes fast. And then we have a bottom wave and it goes slow. And then we have the up wave and it goes fast. Then we have the wave and it goes fast. Then we have the wave and it goes slower. So 1, 2, 3, 4. And then we have the wave here. And it kind of rotates how we animated the last charge. So it goes away from us. And then it repeats. So it's a combination of multiple waves and rotation. So it rotates at the end, and the start is pretty much this kind of wave. So we go here, then we go more straight. Then we go and push maybe one direction. And then we have a change. Then we can skip frames, then we can do a change. Then we can do a fast change. Then we can do subtle. Then we can do fast change. Then we can do smaller change. Then we can skip frame, do something, skip frame, have a big change. And this will give us this kind of really fast, really chaotic change. So it's waves, but waves that are going really fast. So they change within 2-3 frames, and they usually go within 3 to 4 frames from left to right. And sometimes they're a bit slower. Sometimes you have waves that follows for 4 or 5 frames, and it's broken up by blank frames. And it will create this really chaotic, really fast change in motion. And it mostly depends on the design of these charges and on the constant direction. So we're keeping the direction more or less consistent. Here it's roughly mostly left to right, with some parts at the end going right to left. Then we have something in between. So it has a combination of this wave motion, and it's mostly rotation with some fast changes and some slow changes. But it is pretty much just this. So we go 1, then we go 2, then we go 3, then we go 4. Slower. Then we can do this, we can do that, and so on. So this scene, but a bit more chaotic, with some stops, with some slowdowns, and breaking up the form. And that's pretty much it. Knowing that with a bit of practice and analyzing the motion of references and real life lightnings or other artists' works, you can pretty much animate any electricity given the time and experience.
Thank you. This was very insightful. Well, for me personally, because I've been struggling, especially with electricity and kind of having these like 4 rules. Already forgot, but I remember them in my head. They're ingrained. That will help a lot. We actually have some questions, but first of all, will we get the 2D Paint file you worked in today as an example? So other people maybe can download it for themselves and poke around.
I think I can export the GIFs or like PNG sequence on the blank background, which can be probably more beneficial since anyone can open it in any software.
True. And I think the question was like, maybe we get the files later, so they'll be grateful either way. And yeah, GIFs will probably work a bit better for different kind of people. And we also have another question, which is a bit more like regarding the personal journey. For how long have you been animating? And did you realize that effects is something you wanted to do from the start, or you got into effects animation later?
So I don't think there are many people who started effects right off the bat, especially not like 10 years ago or something, because it's really not a big field and it's not well known at all. I mean, it's a bit more well known now, but when I started out, there weren't any courses or any books about it except Elemental Magic. And I started to be interested in animation around like 7 to 8 years ago, but I haven't really started animation until 4 to 5 years ago. I think I started animating at all, like literally anything, around 2018 and around 2000, like late 2018, early 2019. I started being more interested in animation. So with animation effects specifically, I have roughly 4 years of experience. So I started out with some really short courses that I had to go through, and they were pretty interesting and pretty inspiring, but I didn't learn all that much because a lot of it just comes from experience and the process of learning. So even if you take the courses in any field, really, I mean, you've probably experienced it after university, it's still doesn't prepare you for the actual scene most of the time. You still need to put years into practice and actually applying these principles into work. So when I studied animation at all with a personal challenge because I couldn't find the time or like the energy to start animating. So I set a challenge for an April of 2018, I think, to animate every day, at least a small animation every single day. And I was animating really basic stuff like bouncing balls, like basic waves, like a candle or something like that. And even then, I started to be quite interested in the effects. I tried animation, a couple explosions, maybe some smoke, looking at real life references. And that was quite fun. Then I saw an open internship for an FX pack, but I didn't pass it. And that half a year later, I think there was a short course that I applied to and passed, except the last 2 weeks. And I had a couple rough animations from it that were okay. And I more or less understood the principles, at least the basic ones. But I didn't have enough transmission or animation understanding because, I mean, it's just a month and a half of trying to animate it. You don't really have the experience. It doesn't come as fast. So the next year I spent drawing and sketching effects, studying effects references every day. So at least an hour or two, let's take a couple pages of effect sketches from other mediums, from movies, from anime, and other stuff. And after that year, at the end of that year, I got my first job, which was in between for some commercial, which wasn't very fun, but which was still a pretty good learning experience in terms of the animation pipeline and all the other stuff. Then I got Hong Fu animation for music video. Then I did a couple more. I started teaching, started helping out with courses. And at this point, I've been teaching for three and a half years, I think, something like that. Not sure the exact months count. And yeah, I've been working in the industry mostly starting off like from indie projects, music videos, something like that. And now I'm mostly working on movies or TV series or trailers. I mostly worked on ride trailers, a couple other game trailers, since they require a lot of 2D fix artists with more anime inspired style and more realistic stuff. And that's something that I'm aiming for rather than usual Western Saturday cartoon kind of stuff. Because there is like two distinct, there are a lot of different styles, but for the most part, there is like cartoony kind of effects, which are more simple and they use simple designs with minimal amounts of shapes. And they use basic primitives or more geometrical shapes. So circles, more square shapes, more triangular shapes. And then there is more realistic stuff, which uses shapes that resemble more natural forms in reality, which are a bit more complex, a bit more difficult, and a bit more fun to animate for me personally. Although I would totally understand if that's not for everyone, since it usually also requires quite a bit more time to polish and make it interesting. Yeah. And so far, that's pretty much it. I'm self-taught artist. I I started learning like in last grades of school around like 16, something like that. I was taught by internet, by courses, anything I could really find. So it's totally possible for anyone.
And also, we have another question about the People came from your Twitter and they're asking because you did some fire animations and you posted them on Twitter. And is it possible to get some of those animations as GIFs as well? Because they would be very helpful. But I think this can be uh, resolved off screen. If there's a chance you could share them, I think people would be very appreciative
I
as
mean,
well.
I need to know what animation, so because there
Yeah,
are a
you
lot
have
of
to
different.
specify in the chat what exactly you're meaning. Or you could write, you can go to our Discord channel and ask around. And well, I mean, you can ask me on the Discord and
Or you
I'll
can
try
message me on
to,
Twitter.
or yeah, message on Twitter. I just don't know the exact handle, but we can put it in the description later so people can have an idea of who to call for help. And it was also so heartwarming to see people who are like, "Oh, I'm self-taught. I like started drawing in like last grades of high school." For me, it's very uh, encouraging, that people get into the industry, like teach other people, and like they didn't need to start, animating as a prodigy at 6. Like you can do it without like a super early head start and be just as amazing.
I mean, out of other fields, the effects are probably the least like that because you can't
Mm.
really like for the longest time. It's a bit different now, but for the longest time, there weren't any resources on animation effects. So every
Mhm.
effects artist is self-taught. So they might have some foundation in animation from school, but the effects part is pretty much always self-taught.
Ah. Well, I mean, yeah, until very recently, yeah, I didn't realize that FX animation is like a separate field, but now looking at it, they have like a lot of different rules and stuff to them. But still, and it's not interesting how timing and spacing and still like the backbone of everything in
Oh
animation.
yeah, of course.
So,
If it
yeah.
moves, it probably
Yeah, I
is.
mean, yeah, if it moves, it needs to work with timing and spacing. Thank you for showing the thought process behind the design. This was very insightful. I agree. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
Um, if there's someone who wants to ask a question, I'll give you a minute. If not, I think this was very good. It was a very insightful workshop today. This was very cool.
Yeah, we crammed a lot.
And yeah, and we did like a lot of stuff. You also discussed like can't wait for the future if you're ever going to want to do any kind of other workshops. I think those would be just as insightful and fun as well.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah, but for today, I think we can end on this light note. Again, thank you for coming and showing how to do electricity and hosting a workshop for us. I'm very grateful that I get to like be a witness to all of this. This felt like magic, straight up. And I'm very grateful for all of you who are still watching and are still with us. Either you're doing it on the live stream or in the recording. Anyways, it still takes, a lot of mental capacity to sit and actively listen. So good job to you. Good job to us for being here today. And I think, yeah, I think we just say goodbye and end the stream for today. Thank
Yeah,
you for
thanks
coming.
everyone.
Thank you for enjoying. And this was very fun. See you on the Discord channel or on our YouTube for our next workshops. And
See
also,
ya.
can you wish a happy birthday? Someone has a
Yeah,
birthday
sure.
today.
Happy birthday.
Happy birthday. I hope this is a good birthday gift for you. I hope you're happy.
Hopefully, there is no cake explosions.
Oh, no cake explosions. Maybe next time. We'll plan it to the next birthday. Okay. Thank you for being here. I think this is like the third time I'm trying to say goodbye, but bye bye. Again, thank you for coming. See you
Third
next
try.
time.
Okay.
Yeah, maybe that's
See
the
ya.
charm. See you.